Welcome back to another episode of Harmonious at Lunch, the show that fuels your business success. I'm Brandon Gano, your host and guide through the world of harmonious business growth. Today, we're unlocking powerful strategies with industry experts to help your business thrive. If you're a business owner, entrepreneur, or executive, you are in the right place. Join me and our incredible guests today on the journey to clarity, growth, and success. It is time to revolutionize your approach to business. Let's dive in with another episode of Harmonious at Lunch. Welcome in. We got more harmonious, more bite-sized business advice for you. And I'm excited for today's episode. So usually if you are a longtime listener or subscriber, first of all, thank you. Welcome in. If you're not, hit the subscribe button wherever you're watching or listening. But you know that we usually talk about business. We have experts on this show. We talk about business, mindset, health, whatever your overall well-being is. Very rarely do we have a business story or a story of a journey. And I'm excited to dive in with my guest today about starting a podcast, which, hey, guess what? I have done that here too. So this is going to be a cool story to kind of compare notes, see where we're at, and what is it like to actually start something from scratch and build it, and where do you take it from there? So before we go any further or dive into that story, let me welcome my amazing guest, Nick Barellano. How are you, sir? Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be here.
I am super excited to have you. So you started a podcast recently. So let's start kind of at the beginning. I always love to find out like what made you want to start a podcast?
Well, it was all started in 2020 when like really nobody can go outside. And I saw this podcast. I think it was Joe Rogan that really inspired me to really start my own, because I have a dream when I was young to start or to be a radio DJ. And when 2020 kicked in, like nobody really, is getting out, especially here in the country, because all of a sudden, there's this quarantine. Um, then that that 2020 failed dramatically because I still don't know what's my market is, what's my niche is. It's like basically just recording on a camera and doing something, talking about something. And I don't advise that for young people out there. That's not a good strategy. But it really kicked in and became a real company this year because it hits something that really I think most people can relate to, where you're in a job, um because at the time I was starting a logistics company with my college friends. Then we ran that around a year and a half. Then all of a sudden, that mid year of that point, there's this niche or an itch that I want to do a podcast again. I want to start a media company, because in my mind I know what to do now. I know what's gonna happen. I know what's the mistakes gonna be. So I'm trying to avoid that. And around around 2022, I started what Social Media Technology Inc., which was the first media company that I started, and it failed dramatically because one of our founders took off with all the money that's
Ooh.
supposed to be in the company. So that was a rough road. Then, even though that was, the starting point, I still pushed to start a podcast, which is the first version of this show, is the Nick Barellano Show. That time it was called the Nick Barellano Podcast, where essence is all about unfiltered conversation. The problem is, I'm still in that problem or issue that I don't know what's my market niche is.
Mm.
I don't know where my voice fits in, because I have a lot of, know, I wanna tackle most of everything, like politics, sports, that sort of thing. But the problem is, that's not the reality of it. The reality of it, you have to choose a market. Then when you about to want to expand, or you feel like you want to grow more, that's where you become, try to reach out to another market. But if you're gonna start on something like this, something brand new, you have to really um, choose a market niche, then begin from there.
Yeah, so that's an interesting story actually, because so as a consultant for small businesses, entrepreneurs, um, we typically work with the upper 6 to 7, 8 figure revenue companies. So when we're coming into a company, they're established. But what I see a lot in the small business and startup market, that under 100K in revenue, is a lot of the mistakes that you just talked about. So I heard two separate things that are really, really important. I just want to highlight for the listeners, because like I said, so many people make these same mistakes. They're not even mistakes, it's just oversights in starting a business. Your first podcast, what I heard was you lacked a very clear mission and you lacked
Mm-hmm.
vision for the podcast, and ultimately that's why it failed. You didn't know who you served, you didn't know where the podcast was going. Again, not your fault. You had the idea to start a podcast and you just chased it. Fantastic for taking action, but on the flip side of that, if it doesn't have direction, it can't sustain itself. The Bible famously says, without a vision the people will perish. Well, the people is yourself in that scenario, and that
Mm-hmm.
happened. On the other side, the business you started with a business partner that ran away with all your money. um, First of all, I'm sorry to hear that, because that must have been incredibly painful. That is the other
Yeah.
side of where people go wrong, and that's lack of core value alignment. When you're working with somebody else, or even your employees, a VA, if you outsource, or a third party company, if there's no core value alignment, things start to get really hard and they don't mesh together. And that's what tears companies apart from the inside out, versus how the other way was kind of the outside collapsing in on itself. So you saw both sides of it, which is really, really
Mm-hmm.
interesting, in two different companies. Um, and I'm not going to say that's a super unusual or unique story. A lot of people follow that path. So now when you're starting this podcast, the Nick Barellano Show on YouTube, and I'll put that on the screen here while we're talking too. So if you want to follow Nick, if you want to go check out the podcast, it'll be on the screen. It'll be in the show notes as well. You can go check out his show. But I'm curious, now that you have that experience under your belt and you're starting to open up the airwaves, if you will, to this new style of conversation, I would argue that Joe Rogan does the same kind of thing. Like, he doesn't have really a niche. And I'm firmly against, again, for you listening, if you've heard this show, I'm firmly against niching. And we don't believe in niching to an industry or a conversation. You niche to the need. So Nick, what is the need in the marketplace that you have a unique voice on, that you're going to attack with your new show?
um I think for most people that can relate to this, especially living here in the Philippines, we don't have a lot of media that talks about a certain type of issue, especially in politics, because of the red tagging and that sort of thing. So I think the most helpful way to have this conversation or have this discussion is to really sit down with a person who have an impact on different industry, and really talk about a certain issue or a certain topic that is controversial for some people. Like, for example, uh, I have a guest that is coming soon in the podcast, is where uh, he was a leader in the small barangay though. So in a context, barangay is like a small community there in the US. Um, it's like a county, that sort
Mhm.
of thing. So he is a leader of that community. Now, what we talked about in that podcast or in that episode is we talk about a certain things, especially the budget issue, or not a lot of people really understand how the budgeting is, especially in the government side. We talk about several projects, that sort of thing, and I think the most important part there is, especially in politics, is to really have an open conversation um, about, I don't know, certain issues for other people. Like, for example, um, a lot of people have this issue about um, budgeting the budget that is fitted for their needs and their wants, but they don't need the other things like electricity, water, that sort of thing. So that's the thing that the podcast is targeting. And the last point that I want to make is the show is about discussing a taboo stuff, because there in the US, I think sex is not a taboo, that sort of thing. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
I
I'm
don't
not
think
sure about
anything's
that.
taboo in the States anymore. We're in an
Well, that's
interesting
true.
time in our country. So yeah, but I hear what you're saying.
That-
So some the controversial topics, if you will.
Mhm. So, like, yeah, for example, sex, it's very taboo because we're in a fully Christian country, so we don't have a lot of sex education here. So I think that's the issue, and that's the type of discussion that I want to have in this podcast, to really push the people to have a fully full on conversation, just like what Joe Rogan did, or like other podcasters are doing there in the States, especially even this 24 election. Like, there's a lot of locomotion there in the US right now. We have a locomotion in terms of, China versus the Philippines. That's a controversial topic. It's a divided topic here for us Filipinos, but that sort of thing that I want to discuss in the podcast. That's the sort of issues that I would like to have a conversation with like legit people inside the government, or inside the big businesses in the country.
I love this. So we are talking to right now the Joe Rogan of the Philippines. I'm calling it now. It's gonna happen, Nick. I'm super excited for this. But I love it. So then I want to hear how we build this out and learn from the mistakes of those past two companies,
Hmm.
the podcast and the company. So what is your I hear you piecing it together. What is the mission of this podcast? Like, what do you want to bring to the marketplace, if you will?
Um, to really, actually, to have an open minded on a certain topics, because when we talk about certain issues in the Philippines, we're still close minded, and we're still treating politicians like they're the messiah, or something, that sort of thing. Um, but that's the core mission, is to really give the people the platform to have this conversation, and to really listen to the facts, and to the actually happening in the country, because we have this, I know I'm sharing too much, but we have this sort of division, where people on the outer side wants facts, some people wants the reality of it, and it can coexist. But the reality is, it can. It's just we have to find a platform, or just sit on the table and discuss the whole thing, and really just listen, not just talk, but really digest the what the other people are saying on the other table.
Yeah, I think that's important too, because it's what it sounds like is you want to be the unbiased voice to bring clarity to the listeners, whether that's the people of the Philippines or whoever tunes in, is
Hmm.
just share the reality of what's going on in truth, which is so important. And I think, I honestly don't listen to the Joe Rogan show. I know him. I've seen the clips of the show. I can't speak to whether or not, he's anchored in truth or it's more entertainment. But I like that this is the approach that you're taking, because this gets completely away from the conversation of what niche am I in. You are the niche. The niche is
Hmm.
the service you're providing. You're basically creating your own niche. It sounds like not a whole lot of people are doing this in your country, which is fantastic. So that's the mission. Moving forward to the vision, where are you going? Like, what kind of change do you want to see brought about because you're hosting this podcast, you're having these taboo interviews, if you will? Like, what is that change that you want to see in the next 3 to 5 years because of your show?
To not just, be like, what do you call this, more brutal to one another, because sometimes when we talk about certain topics or certain issues, like, there's a lot of people are still um putting like putting gloves, like they're ready to punch people because they don't disagree with someone. So um at that in that point, I think more open discussion, and hopefully that the show reflects that, the show really makes an impact on that level. I mean, I agree that Joe Rogan, I don't know, I don't agree most of Joe Rogan is doing or is saying, but what I'm trying to, like, to point out is, the platform of Joe Rogan is about openness. He invites a lot of people in different spectrum of the political colors, as you say. But you know, um, I think that's one of the ways that I would like to see. Or I would like to change is the mindset of people about talking about a certain issue or about a certain topics.
Yeah, I like that. And then kind of on the other side, like we mentioned, the core value piece. So what I would foresee happening potentially is you're bringing on politicians, you're talking about taboo topics. It would be, or it could be, very easy to kind of sacrifice those core values and say like, oh no, if a politician pays me enough money to come on the show and kind of spread their message, I would compromise my own core values and just make a quick buck, right? I mean, I think we've all probably been presented with those situations at some point. Whether we've taken them or not is a different story. So for you, like, what is the anchor for your show if you want to stand on that mission of spreading truth and openness and unbiased opinions? What are the things that you feel are at your core that you just won't compromise when you're growing the show?
Well, I think more importantly is the journalistic side of it, because if you look at it at the wider spectrum, it's technically journalism in a unbiased or unfiltered way. Because in journalism, especially in the news center, the news spectrum, there's a lot of journalistic what do you call this? There's this journalist uh, format, as you say, that certain journalists have to follow this category, this process, this procedure. But in this case, there's no really, procedure to it. Um there's no someone higher than me who's speaking, don't speak to this politician, don't upload this, don't edit this, that sort of thing. So having a full control of that at the same time, not really. I know it's kind of contradicting, but I believe that if the people have more control of the narrative, it's much better for the open discussion.
Yeah, and I like that you pointed that out too, because I talked to a friend of mine who was in the journalism industry for over over 2 decades, and what he told me when we were kind of talking about social media and podcasting was I made the mistake of saying that everybody these days is a journalist, and he actually stopped me and corrected me, and I thought it was really interesting. He said everybody is a publisher, not everybody is a journalist. And the key distinction is you're taking the approach of bringing facts, bringing truth, bringing unbiased opinion. That's journalism, true journalism.
Hmm.
Publishing is we all have TikTok in our pockets. We can record a video without facts, without truth, without really anything. We can make up a story and publish it, but that's not true journalism. And that's really where all of this started from. That's why we need people like you creating a show like you have to bring the
Yeah.
truth and the true journalism to light. So I really love this conversation. I love where you're going with it. So we got to wrap this up. If you're watching, again, listening, the link to Nick's show is in the description. It's also on the screen to go find him on YouTube. But tell me, where are you going over the next, let's just say the next year? Like how are you planning to grow this show, grow your audience, and bring on more amazing guests?
I would like to invite more politician or more controversial person in the podcast. That's for sure, and to really, have this a discussion about everything and anything. That's the important part of it, because, especially in YouTube, it's a wide audience that loves to tackle a certain thing or certain issues. That's the thrill of it, having that vision of you can serve a lot of people, not at the same time. Because sometimes, especially in the business or in the podcast space, where there's a sports podcast, they only talks about sports. So your numbers can grow, but in a certain point there's a limit. But for this niche kind of here in the Philippines, it will grow. Hopefully, there's no limit to it. As like, you know, not like any other any other podcast who have the same kind, let's say, format like this podcast.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Nick, I got to thank you for coming on and sharing your story and your journey, and also the path of where you're going. So Again, if you want to follow Nick, if you want to check out the show, it's on the screen. It's in the show notes. Nick, thanks for coming.
No, thank you so much for letting me in. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, this is a cool conversation. And I love having Nick here. For you listening, again, if you're not subscribed, please do. Make sure you're following along so we can give you this disruptive business advice 20 minutes a day on your lunch break. But this is why I love this conversation. So back in the beginning of this conversation, I mentioned that a lot of startups and those newer companies under 100K in revenue, they make those 3 core mistakes. So if you take nothing else from this episode, and this is where we start with all of our clients. Remember, we work with 7, 8-figure plus entrepreneurs, big companies, established years, decades in business. And we always start with these 3 things because it makes the biggest difference. It's the core values. What do you stand for? What are those immutable laws, some people say, that you will not break in growing your business? You have to have those in place so you don't get into situations where potentially people run away with your money or you have bad partnerships like Nick had. Then you have the mission. Who do you serve? Why do you serve them? What is the injustice in the marketplace that you exist to fight against? And then the vision. I said it before, without a vision, the people perish. It is a biblical business truth. If you don't have a vision, if you don't have a path or something you are chasing, you will never, ever get there. And you'll also have employees that are not motivated to chase that vision and show up to work every day. So have those 3 things, especially if you're newer in business, but even for those of you who are on your 5th, 10th, 20th year in business, you've crossed the 7, 8-figure mark. Have those 3 things, revise them, update them, and then build your business around that. You'll be surprised how much easier your business is and how much it grows once you have those 3 things in place. So thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you got some of that bite-sized business advice at lunch, and we'll see you on the next episode of Harmonious at Lunch.